Welcome to America's Commercial Real Estate Show, your source for intel, forecasts, and success strategies. Hello, I'm Michael Bull. The segment is brought to you by BOMI.org. Check them out for facilities and property management training. It's BOMI, BOMI.org. Well, today we have another great show for you. We're going to talk about crowdfunding for commercial real estate. And stay with us here. Crowdfunding is really growing. It's been an incredible marketplace around the country. And we're going to talk about some tips and strategies and things to think about if you're in a sponsor, if you invest in real estate, or if you develop real estate, or you invest in notes or buy own notes. If you're a principal and you have a big company with lots of properties, you want to check this out. Now, we're also going to look at it if you're an investor. Maybe you're in front of a computer and want to invest in commercial real estate. We'll talk about some tips and strategies there. Well, please welcome my guest. It's Darren Powderly. Darren is co-founder with CrowdStreet, and he's joining us here in Studio One. Darren, thanks for being with us.
It's a pleasure to be here in Atlanta, Michael. Thank you for having me.
I know we don't have the fresh air you have in Bend, Oregon, but at least we have a lot of trees
out there. It is gorgeous in Atlanta today.
Yeah, it's a great day. Well, Darren, let's talk about the sponsor side. There's a lot of people that listen to our show and watch that own real estate. We have clients that own real estate, and first of all, let's talk about what's going on with crowdfunding today. What is the size? Because it seems like it's been a kind of a small portion of the market. How big is crowdfunding? What do you see?
It started out as 0% of the market not that long ago, so It has grown substantially. For instance, probably at CrowdStreet we'll probably do about $600 million of raise for next year, which is, since we started in 2014, it's a nice growth pattern, and we're seeing that from other participants in the market. And the reason why the market has grown to accept, online real estate investing is because its time really had come. And we think about, why investors should invest online is the same way that Charles Schwab probably thought about why stocks and bonds should be, bought and sold online 20 years ago, right? And so everybody's doing their banking online, and everybody is investing in stocks online and building wealth in other areas. So why not commercial real estate? And so, Charles Schwab is a hero of ours at CrowdStreet. We're trying to take what he taught us and apply it to this wonderful asset class of commercial real estate. And investors think we're doing the right thing. We get out there in the market and listen to our investors, and they literally are thanking us when we get together with them for helping them get access to some of the best real estate operating companies in the nation.
Well, let's say I am an operating company and I own real estate, or I'm buying real estate or developing it. Why should I consider crowdfunding? What are the benefits to me?
Yeah, so the key benefits to, we call them sponsors, right? So real estate operating companies, investment managers, developers, anybody who is a principal of real estate investing and also needs to raise equity, which is 100% of those people, those companies, right? Every firm that we've worked with uses debt with the exception of one or two, which is their specific unique business strategy. So everyone needs to raise equity. And how do you do it? You either have your own money, and so you don't need anybody else's money. You're very wealthy, and you can put millions of dollars to work in any particular deal. Or you raise money at the other end of the spectrum from institutional joint venture equity partners. Think JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, right? You can get $100 million checks from these companies. But if you're in the middle market, which is the place that the place in the market that we play, many developers syndicate their equity.
And how do you describe that middle market?
Well, it's anywhere from a property size or value from, say, $10 to $50 million is the total property value. And so they're looking to raise anywhere from a couple $1 million to, say, $15 million. That's a good definition of middle market. It's not the onesie-twosie $1 million property here and there that typically are bought by individual investors. And it's not the $100 million properties that are truly institutional. It's this big, wide part of the market across America. middle market that we specialize in. So if you're one of those investment firms that specializes in the middle market, maybe you syndicate from friends and family, maybe you raise money from semi-institutional groups, right? And they look to us, they look to the online platforms that are out there doing this crowdfunding. It's really as a form of online syndication. That's a better name for it. Yeah. It's just not as catchy, But crowdfunding is definitely it's a misnomer, right? It's not exactly defining what we do. It's really an online form of syndication that enables a sponsor to scale their relationships across the country and even beyond that, across the world. Although most of the platforms in America today are focused on U.S. investors.
Who's using it as a sponsor that my audience may recognize?
Well, there are hundreds of middle market and even enterprise real estate firms using some sort of form of online syndication and fundraising. In Newport Beach, California, the 8th largest office property owner in the world, I thought it was the United States, they're the 8th largest in the world, KBS. They're using KBS Direct as their own website to attract investors to visit with them, kind of like retailers have their own e-commerce store on their website. Well, KBS has their own investor portal. If you go to kbsdirect.com, you will see an Invest Now. You'll also see a tremendous amount of information there to learn about commercial real estate and their live offering right now. So that's one example. KBS happens to also put their offerings on the CrowdStreet marketplace. So that's one big example. Hine Securities is not crowdfunding. They are not crowdfunding at all, but they do have technology at Hine Securities to service investment advisors and financial advisors, right? So it's a form, they went from analog distribution of their offering materials for their private placements to digital. And that's a big shift alone in the commercial real estate industry, is to distribute offering materials in a digital format that ultimately go to the retail investors. But here's a great success story right here in Atlanta. Carter USA is a best-in-class commercial real estate operating firm here in Atlanta. They do mostly ground-up development. They brought us a deal called the Morehouse student housing right down by the Morehouse campus south of town, where they have a big footprint as a firm. And this firm is 40 years old, and they have tried a lot of different methods to capitalize their deal flow. Very institutional firm. Great firm. And they put their offering for the Morehouse Student Housing Project on the CrowdStreet marketplace. Fortunately for us, they had options. And we raised them $1.5 million in an hour. We were literally laughing about this because that was a record breaker. And so, it's an outlier situation. Most of our deals take 30 to 45 days to fund, which I think is typical for the industry because a lot of these platforms are best efforts platforms. But in that case, it was a wonderful success story. But no question, between the, say, top 10 online fundraising / crowdfunding marketplaces that are active today, there's 1,000 or more real estate firms that are actively doing that.
If we use that example, Darren, it was fast. Was it also more cost effective than using an institutional investor?
Yes, it is. And the reason why syndication, even in the analog offline way, is typically preferred by the investment manager or the sponsor is because, number one, control, right? Control of your destiny is with syndicated equity with high net worth investors is the number one benefit, right? Because if Goldman Sachs is your JV equity partner, it's almost like they own you and they own the project. If they want to sell, you're going to sell, right? You don't get to you can argue, but you're probably going to lose that argument because they have all the money in the deal, 90% of the money in the deal. So control is the number one benefit to the sponsor. Number two is cost of capital, right? So a syndicated equity source often is a better economic deal for the sponsor, right? And for the investor, because it's, again, this direct to investor part of our business model. It's more efficient. And quite frankly, the individual investors, don't run as expensive of a platform, nor do they, require such demanding economics. And number 3 is certainty of capital. And that third one, we're just still, I think the industry is still sort of, going through some, it's out of its infancy, but it's definitely in its probably awkward teenage years, right? I mean, it is absolutely proven, but it has a little ways to go. And solving for certainty of capital is that big next step for the industry. And there's some great innovation happening there. So it will happen, but like, a crowdfunding portal, I call it crowdfunding again for the sake of the reference, but, a platform like ours and the others, they're typically good for, $2 to $4 million today. And that's a capacity issue as the investor communities that we have built continue to grow. There's one platform that says that they're good for $5 to $20 million. So again, that's good to see. That's good for this online.
And you mentioned that your investors in this crowdfunding setup are direct to the client or to the sponsor, but not all crowdfunding sites are the same. What are some of the basics of how some of these crowdfunding sites work for a sponsor?
Sure. There's basically 3 business models, Michael. Number 1 is direct to investor. Okay, and what that means is that the platform is truly making a match through their platform between the individual investor or the LP, and it could be a family office, it could be a semi-institutional, but it's typically mostly an individual investor, with the sponsor, right? With that
and that's what you do at CrowdStreet.
That's what we do.
One of the things, okay.
We make a direct connection. We're like Match.com for investors and sponsors, right?
Okay.
It's a simple reference point. The other business model is what we call the SPV business model, and that is where the platform itself creates a legal entity which separates the investor from the sponsor. There's some pros there, like one check is written to the sponsor. Yeah. That's beneficial. The con, for instance, is that there's a blockage between the two parties, right? And you're relying on that platform's SPV, okay? And so pros and cons, and it depends on the needs of the sponsor and the needs of the investor. And so it's nice to be able to have different optionality. So those are the 2 main models. Is special purpose vehicle, SPV.
Okay,
it's just the legal entity, kind of who controls it. In the direct to investor model, the sponsor actually controls that SPV. And in the platform SPV model, it's actually the platform.
Yeah. And so that brings up my next question I think my audience would have is a sponsor, how do you, if you're direct to investors, are you nervous as a sponsor that you got to talk with potentially 100 people or communicate with 100 investors versus this maybe a crowdfunding site where I just deal directly with the crowdfunding site and they handle the crowd?
Right. Well, in the early days and still today, the burden of management is something that is on everybody's mind, right? And so with these direct-to-investor platforms, success equals new relationships with dozens, maybe 50 new high net worth investors, right? And so that's great. Now the burden of management comes into full view, right? So how does a platform address that? Well, number 1, technology, of course, right? If you have a great investment management solution, you can manage many, many more investors at scale, right? And so that's a key part to scaling syndication is top-notch investment management software and process. Number 2, in our case, I can speak to our case because I don't know of another platform that does it quite this way, and it's important to solve for burden of management. Technology is essential, but so is service. You have to have investor relations team at the platform. So we have a large team of IR professionals, and they're an extension of the sponsor's internal team. Right? Okay. So almost every sponsor that we work with has an internal person or persons team in charge of accounting and investor relations and operations, right? And so we're like an extension of that team for the purpose of maintaining the relationships and communications and documents and updates to the investors that we procure, right?
Right. And
for that sponsor.
And you're not guaranteeing the results of these projects for the investors that invest through you, but you are checking them out. How many of these projects come to you that you guys actually put on your site? How many do you accept?
Well, we're fortunate. We have a great reputation in the market, that we've earned since 2013 when we first put our first website out. And we launched our marketplace in 2014. And one of the things that we decided to do was, one, the direct-to-investor model. It was, we were one direct-to-investor model. There were 10 SPV business models. It was a little easier to get that business model off the ground. So we were slower to launch in the first couple of years because we chose that business model. Now, we get a lot of inbound leads today and have for a number of years. And we do have a very high bar, right? We from the beginning, we said we're commercial real estate professionals. That's what we know. And that's what we want to bring to investors.
Right.
And so I'm a CCIM, and I know you are as well. I'm a big supporter of the CCIM industry or organization. And I think it represents the best education in the industry, right? So, back to our sort of qualification process and the funnel that we go through. Many sponsors come to us from all shapes and sizes, right? And again, we focus on the middle market. We look for sponsors with track record at the asset level as well as the investor management level, right? So they have to have a history of managing LPs and individual investor LPs as a part of their LP, network, right? Okay. So that's a requirement. Those two big things, those are absolutely required. And then there's a lot of other things that we look at the sponsor level, at the property level, and then at the investment structure level. And so we check a lot of these boxes, and at the same time, what we stop short of is giving investment advice, right? So what we're saying to our investor community is, here are the boxes that we've checked in our diligence, process. And it's very robust, and it's, check, look at it. It's all right there for you to see what do we do to make sure that the sponsor passed all the checks. And the deal did as well. But that's where we stop. We say, and now it's up to you. It's up to you to make an informed investment decision with all the information and transparency that we have presented to you here.
Okay. What do you think about some of the claims of returns that some crowdfunders sites or crowdfunding sites put out there? I've seen some presentations of returns and properties that folks can invest in that would even make a broker shudder. It's like, are you kidding me? Does that concern you at all for the crowdfunding industry as a whole?
For certain. So you asked the question. I got around to a number of points, but we approve about 3 or 4% of the deals that come to us that we look at. Okay. And the majority of those are like 70% of them are easy no's, right? Like somebody has 2 guys with a pickup truck want to buy a duplex. That's a no, clearly. Right. So there's a lot of easy no's, and then there's a lot of no's that come after a certain amount of diligence.
But you haven't seen my pickup
research.
Truck.
I'm sure you have like a big old Ram or Ford F-150. So, there are some that take work to get to a decision. Okay. And then there's actually, quite frankly, still, CrowdStreet is actively seeking out the best-in-class real estate operating companies in the country, and we're teaching them about what this experience is like online. And we're teaching them about this direct-to-consumer, method of raising capital, not to replace what they've done in the past, as a supplement. Right? Okay. Omni-channel fundraising is the way to think about it.
So how do you feel when you see some crowdfunding sites putting out these incredible return estimates?
So that scares the daylights out of us. I mean, obviously, that it would be a blemish on the industry. I think there is skepticism, a healthy dose of skepticism in the market, around some of these platforms that are just, whether they are intentionally bad actors, which I don't think is exactly the case in most cases. I think they're just like full of optimism and lacking on the realism. I think that they don't have, the experienced underwriters in real estate, private equity professionals like we do on staff, right? And so when we see that, it kind of makes us cringe. Yeah. Well, it does make us cringe. All we can do is continue to uphold the highest bar from an underwriting standpoint, and also working with great sponsors. But there's interesting, Yeah, you have to, as an individual investor, I think, looking at these platforms, you have to enter with a healthy dose of skepticism, and actually talk about, not brokers, maybe just, ask a professional, or don't invest, if it looks too good to be true, it is.
And I want to get into the investor side of this in a segment after this, but just one quick clarification for the audience of sponsors or people who develop and buy properties. You guys have crowdstreet.com, where people can, if they get approved, for the project gets approved, right, in the sponsor, that you guys can handle it. But you also provide the software if a company wants to do it themselves as a sponsor? Right.
Yeah. Okay. It's a big piece of our business, and what we're really empowering is throughout the industry is these local real estate or say middle market real estate companies, but even the biggest ones. Right? I mentioned KBS Direct before. KBS is a massive institution. Hines is a massive institution, and they don't do, let's just forget about crowdfunding at all in this topic, right? They license technology to manage their LPs and then to digitize their fundraising process. That's what our white label software does, right? It's separate yet complementary with the marketplace, but it's totally a standalone, private, and secure, cloud-based solution that we think is really powerful. We know it is because we've had great success stories around the country with firms, investment firms who said, hey, now that I have upgraded to this modern investment management and fundraising software, right, my investors are happier. Certainly my internal team is happier. The back office is this beautiful sort of console of how to, manage all your contacts and your properties. There's an asset management component to it, right? Yeah. Documents and distributions and email marketing, and it's got waterfall calculations and so forth. There's a lot to it, and so just by licensing out that technology, which is, by the way, the same exact technology that we use to run the CrowdStreet site, but it's like a separate version of it. It's battle tested and it's really robust, and
well, good, and it seems to make a lot of sense too. For you mentioned a company that you can't mention yet that has a great reputation out there. So if you have a company like that and use your great reputation to do your own crowdfunding, then maybe you don't have to worry as much about maybe some crowdfunding sites that maybe when the market turns could have some issues. Well, I want to get with you on the investor side, the retail investor, because anyone out there listening to this can go and invest in commercial real estate deals with small amounts of money now, and I'm going to get some tips and some thoughts from you there. So stay with us. We'll take a short break and we'll be right back. I'm Michael Bull. This is America's Commercial Real Estate Show.